Hey friends, Tashin here. Wanted to make a video about something that I have been thinking about with my curiosity work and my learning practice in recent months, which is doing a deep dive and my emerging process for doing a deep dive. I'm thinking about this compliment that River gave me a while ago, which was like, and I'm paraphrasing my memory of it, which is always risky business, but he said something like, oh, Tashin's superpower as a learner is that he can make anything his autistic special interest. Like, you know, and that's like a colloquial turn of phrase. Apologies if that's offensive to anyone on the spectrum or who cares about people who are actually on the spectrum, etc. That term is sort of thrown about these days, but I mean in the colloquial sense of like having a special interest that you are really obsessed with and you dive deeply into for a while. And River was talking about how he doesn't really get to choose his interests, but he feels like I get to choose and I can just be like, yep, I'm going to go get obsessed with that for a while and learn as much as I can about it. And yeah, I do feel like I have that ability, and I've done that to varying degrees my whole life. I remember as a kid going to the library and just checking out like pretty much every book about chess or some other topic that I was interested in, and then reading through them and learning as much as I could. And I've done this my whole life. And it's something that I have been revisiting in recent months because I realized, oh, I'm doing this repeatedly. There'll be some topic or some thinker or some idea that I get really interested in and want to learn more about. And then I do dive deeply into it. And that just already happens naturally. But I'm doing this often enough that it's happening repeatedly. And I think I realized it's worth reflecting on what exactly my process is for doing a deep dive and even creating a process or an SOP for it. And so I did some reflecting and I did end up creating an SOP for doing a deep dive, and that's already just been so valuable. So I created a dashboard in Notion. I use Notion to manage my learning and of course my projects also, but I already had dashboards for like what I was reading and what I was writing and my podcast and what online courses I was taking and stuff like that. And so it was very natural to add another one for deep dives. And it's a database, so you can use a template in there in the database. And so I have a template in there for doing a deep dive, and that's the way that I manage that SOP. And it's still early days, so I imagine that this SOP will evolve, but it starts with like naming the topic and picking an emoji, and then I sort of journal about why I'm interested in it and what it is that I want to learn and what questions I already have and how I became curious about this thing and what I remember about that. And I also create like a placeholder folder in my Apple Notes for any notes that I may take. And I find it helpful to use Discord to journal about specific topics. So I create a feed in Discord for discussing that topic in a certain server. And yeah, and then I start listing people that I know who know a lot about that topic that I can ask questions of or that I might consider having on my podcast. And then I start collecting resources, and there's headers for like books or articles or courses and podcasts and whatever. And I just start collecting resources there. It doesn't really matter that it's there. So if I end up keeping them in my notes folder or on the Discord, that's fine too. But I just want to have placeholders to catch these things. And yeah, I start diving in. And if it's active, then I set aside some time to dive deeply into it. And, you know, different interests last for a different length of time. And I guess I experience it as there's some question burning in my heart or set of questions. And that just burns for as long as it needs to for those questions to get answered. And at some point those questions do get answered, and then I'm no longer interested in the thing. Like that happened with military strategy. I was pretty obsessed for 2 or 3 years, and then I wasn't obsessed anymore, and it just wasn't as interesting to me anymore. And maybe it will recur, or come back at a deeper level, but I feel like I answered the questions that I had, and I just haven't been that interested in military strategy except explaining it to people or passing on what I learned so that they can use it. But it was no longer something I was interested in diving deeply into. And currently there's a bunch of things that I have in the deep dive, both, and because it's a Kanban board in Notion, there's some that are active and then some that are sort of on deck that I have as a placeholder of like, yep, I might want to do a deep dive into that in the future. I might want to get obsessed or interested in that in the future, but it doesn't seem like it's quite time yet. And I find it useful for Kanban boards to have WIP limits or work in progress limits where it's like, yeah, you can only do so much at a time. So I haven't actually made a formal WIP limit, but something like 2 or 3 deep dives already feels like a lot to do in parallel. And I also went back and picked some of the things that I'd gotten obsessed with recently and made placeholders for them and moved those into a kind of a done column so that if they become active again, I can, trace that. But it also just felt nice to have some things in the done column. Like, oh yeah, I did get obsessed with that this year and I did learn a lot about that. And now I'm kind of done with that for now. And there's also a whole other section of the SOP that's like some suggestions or ideas for things that I could do to kind of digest the learning. The curiosity department, zooming out, is of service in that it's not just people learning about what they want to learn about, but it's also people sharing what they learn along the way and sharing the breadcrumbs that they wish they'd had and leaving the breadcrumbs that you wish you'd had. And I do that through my blog and my podcast and my Twitter and threads and all that. And, this video is me leaving the breadcrumbs I wish I'd had. And so there's some suggestions of like, maybe you want to make a video about it, or maybe you want to have someone on your podcast, or maybe you want to write a thread or a blog post or whatever it is. But here are some tried and true ways that you could digest what you're learning, either as you're learning it or after you've learned it, into an artifact that's of some lasting value. And they're just kind of prompts for digesting the material, not just receiving it, but sort of creating something that can help other people or make sense to other people. And doing that along the way is a really big part of my process of like, if I realize something or learn something or have a question, just putting that out into the world. And that creates feedback loops where people are like, hey, you might want to check out this book or this author or this podcast or this online course, or people connect me to other ideas or whatever. It's that serendipity is so useful and the internet's so good at that. So yeah, I've really enjoyed making this SOP, and I'm really excited by just adding a little bit of structure and formalizing to something I was already doing naturally. And that reflecting on what I'm doing and formalizing it means that I can do it even better and at a higher degree. And I'm excited about this SOP evolving over time as I learn more about my own process and what works and what doesn't work. And I feel proud of it. So I'm happy to be sharing it with you and telling you about it. And maybe it'll be interesting to you. Maybe you'll do deep dives of your own or what have you. If you have any thoughts about what's worked for you, if you get really interested in something, to sort of research and learn about it in an intentional way on your own, kind of as an autodidact, then I'd be so curious to hear and would love to hear in the comments or correspond with you about it. And in the meantime, I am sending you love.